Hello and welcome to the Sportstopia Fantasy Fire and Ice podcast. My name is Chris Crawford. Today is Friday, September 1st. I can't believe we had reached the September month already. I'm joined by my good buddy, Drew Silva. Drew, how are you doing this fine September 1st day?
Great, man. I love September weather. I've got a light hoodie on. It's gorgeous
Yes.
outside. Might go for a bike ride after we get done with the show. All is right in the world. College football is back. We're
Yes,
good.
sir. Drew and I talk often about how much we love the fall weather. We are built for it. We love it. We love that crispness. And it's here. And just because it's fall weather, though, doesn't mean there isn't a lot of excellent baseball to watch. This is such a loaded slate of games. I'm really excited for it. But Drew, it is fall, but is there some weather that people need to take a closer eye on today? Or is this going to be just a nice, lovely day for everyone?
September has arrived with beautiful forecasts across this entire slate. I like that I've become the meteorologist on
I
this
love it
show.
too.
I'm just looking at forecasts as it relates to baseball, but we got a lot of 80s and 70s across the entire slate. The only chances of rain is in like Southern California, surprisingly, but it's about a 10%, 13% chance at San Diego and at Los Angeles and a little bit at Oakland, but nothing that looks like it should cause any sort of delay or postponement. I think we are free and clear to get all of these games in, and what there are 16 of them because there is a double header going between the Cubs and the Reds. I believe that's a makeup doubleheader from a rain out earlier in the season.
Can you imagine when that game got rained out, thinking that has major postseason implications, by the way? Like, that happened
No,
so long ago, and we were just like, you really got to play that two of those games late in September. But now it is an absolutely
you
massive
know what?
couple of games for
Yeah,
both teams.
I don't mean to cut you off, but it's a makeup from April 5th.
That's
I
right.
just looked
Yeah,
that
that's
up.
what I was saying. I looked that up, and I was like, April 5th? That was like 4 days into the season, and we're just dreading both of those teams, to be completely honest with you. But they're both playing well, and it is a very nice slate of games on top of that as well. Injuries to be aware of. I'll just start with Julio Rodriguez because as a Seattle Mariner fan, I pay close attention to that. Missed the last couple of games with soreness in his left foot, underwent treatment. All the talking points have suggested that he will return this weekend, but there's a couple of days in this weekend. So it is not a lock that Julio Rodriguez will be patrolling center field for the Mariners over the weekend, or excuse me, at least on Friday. A good chance to return Saturday and Sunday. But if you're playing in daily fantasy, you're going to want to make that Julio Rodriguez is hitting that lineup. Any other injuries that we need to worry about?
Yeah, we're still monitoring Jorge Soler with his little hip injury. He was supposed to return on Thursday, but then got scratched from the lineup. So that's still a bit of an issue for him. He's sitting at 35 home runs on the year. So if he is in the lineup, you want to consider him. If he's not in the lineup, obviously you want to stay away. Lane Thomas still dealing with some back discomfort. Those are situations that we were monitoring from Thursday. You mentioned Julio. Salvador Perez was scratched from the Royals lineup on Thursday because of back and neck tightness. He's considered day to day leading into the weekend. Not sure if he's going to play Friday. Tyler O'Neill of the Cardinals has some recurring knee soreness, questionable for their series opener against Pittsburgh. Javier Baez has missed 2 straight because he's a little beat up, according to manager AJ Hinch there in Detroit. So something to monitor there. Brendan Rodgers had an illness earlier this week, but should be back following Thursday's scheduled off day for the Rockies. We're going to talk about that game because it's at Coors Field. And then you have Lars Nootbaar and Jake Fraley possibly returning from IL stints. Worth tracking those. Also kind of worth tracking where Fraley fits with the Reds now. They got those waiver claims on Harrison Bader and Hunter Renfroe.
Yeah.
Like Cincinnati suddenly has a crowded outfield and a crowded, mix for the DH role. They're going to be able to platoon a lot better than they had. Like Renfroe and Bader are specifically excellent against left-handed pitching. I really like those waiver claims for the Reds. It was all Ohio on waiver deadline day on Thursday.
I'm glad Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez are staying together. That's the third transaction that's happened where those two are going. They originally started with the Washington Nationals, moved to the Chicago White Sox, moved to the Los Angeles Angels, and now they're off to Cleveland. By the way, Waiver rules, absolutely stupid. It is insane that they waiver wire priority doesn't change after every claim. It's one of the few things, I
Mhm.
think, not one of the few things, but one of the things fantasy sports gets right more than professional sports. You make your waiver claim, you move to the back of the line, and everybody else gets a chance at the next one. You put your priority. Cleveland would probably put Giolito at 1. That's fine. But Cincinnati should have had that next chance. Cincinnati was punished, and the other teams as well were punished for being better than those teams, and that is a silly, silly rule. Let's talk about some stacks to play now that I'm done with my little diatribe there. And we're using the Contrarian Optimizer to help build those stacks. Make sure you check that out. Go to fantasysportslogic.com. Cannot recommend this tool enough. But Drew, who's the team that you're looking to stack and build a lineup with your DFS today?
Starting with the Orioles, mind you, the AL East leading Orioles, they'll be taking on right-hander Zach Davies and the
I love that.
Diamondbacks down in the desert on Friday night. Davies just returned last week from a month-long absence to heal a bout of lower back inflammation. He has a 6.93 ERA and 13 starts, even when healthy this season. A very gettable pitcher, and an Orioles team that, can make itself dynamic with platoon situations, getting those lefties going against a righty and Davies. You could pay up for Adley Rutschman and feel good about it, but I like some of the more reasonably priced options with Gunnar Henderson, Cedric Mullins, Anthony Santander, and Ramon Urias. Henderson has begun to run away with the AL Rookie of the Year award. At DraftKings right now, he's at minus 700 to win AL Rookie of the Year. Tristan
Wow.
Casas at plus 750. Tanner Beebe at plus 1200. Masataka Yoshida has faded at plus 1500. Josh Young of the Rangers was a one-time favorite, but has fallen back to plus 4,500 since fracturing his thumb in early
Wow.
August. I like the O's to put up some crooked numbers in Arizona and build that AL East lead. You can grab some of the more expensive players, but yeah, I like Henderson, Mullins, Santander, and Urias to do a lot of the damage and reap a lot of the RBIs and runs scored there against Arizona.
Yeah, I like that call a lot. It's fun that both of those teams are in playoff contention, but I trust Cole Irvin a little bit more as a starter than I do Zach Davies at this point. That's a weird thing to say. A couple of years ago, we would not
Mm.
be saying that, but it is absolutely what I'm going with. Speaking of pitchers who have not pitched well, Drew, I don't know if you know this, but Jordan Lyles has not had a very effective 2023. And in fact, has a chance to be the first 20 game loser in quite some time and has pitched like it as well. He has a 7.89 ERA in the month of August, has a 17-6 strikeout to walk ratio, showing how little he has missed bats. That's been kind of his modus operandi throughout his career. And that's why I'm going with the Red Sox as my stack. Rafael Devers, Luis Urias, Trevor Story, Alex Verdugo, like all of those guys against just a dreadful pitcher. The Red Sox offense has been pretty inconsistent all season, but I do think that those bats offer a chance, and they aren't terribly expensive as well. You can get all of those guys. Devers a little more expensive, but not quite the same high price point that he had early in the season. I think all four of those guys have a real chance for success against arguably the worst pitcher in baseball.
I like that. I was looking at a lot of Red Sox as like, plug and play
Sure.
contrarian values, but we'll
Yeah.
get to some of those later in the show.
Good
Um,
tease.
my other stack is going to be the Rays versus the Guardians. Thinking Randy Rosarena, Isaac Paredes, Luke Raley, and Josh Lowe. I talked about the Orioles leading the AL East. The Rays are hot on their tail, having won four
Sure.
straight games and 8 of their last 10, despite an injured list that is filled with frontline starters. You could take the starters that are on the Rays injured list and put them on the Reds, and the Reds would be the favorite to win the NL Central. All of a sudden, it's been that big of a blow to their pitching staff, and then losing the face of their franchise. We don't have to talk about the Wander Franco situation, but you'd think that would have been a serious distraction
Mhm.
at the very least, or resulted in a downturn in a real life baseball sense because of the talent that Wander Franco possesses. But it hasn't been.
No.
Only 1.5 games back right now of Baltimore. And much like the Orioles, the Rays love attacking the opposition with platoons, going up against Cleveland right-hander Cal Quantrill and his 6.45 ERA. They can go lefty heavy. Josh Lowe, Luke Raley among those left-handed bats. And then Randy Rosarena and Isaac Paredes reaping the benefits in the heart of the order. You want to think about Brandon Lau maybe too, and maybe Yandy Diaz, of course, as the likely leadoff man, and he's enjoyed a full-on breakout season at age 32. If you want to pay up for that, I couldn't blame you. Stack up the Rays at Cleveland. Man, it's been a weird month in the Guardians front office. They sold at the trade deadline when they were one game back of the AL Central lead, but then got
Right.
aggressive at Thursday's waiver claim deadline and getting Giolito, Ronaldo Lopez, Matt Moore, despite now being 5 games back of the Twins. Maybe they like mostly wanted to block the Twins from getting any of those players, which
Fight
also
claim.
blocked, yeah, it blocked the NL wildcard hopefuls. Yeah, like you
Yeah.
said, Chris, the new waiver process certainly needs some
Yeah.
adjustments. It's not being used as I think Rob Manfred intended, to say the least.
Nope. And I guess it's a little bit trial by error, but I do like that call. And I do think the Franco thing is a great point that like it would have been an easy thing to justify a team struggling. But instead the team has, and they've just shown the depth. That is what Tampa Bay does is they have somehow it seems like they have a 42-man roster because there are just so many platoon players that they can plug in
Yep.
and still be effective. The Toronto Blue Jay offense has not been terribly effective this year. I think it's been one of the bigger disappointments. But you know what's a good way to get healthy? Face Chris Flexen in Colorado, and that's exactly what they're doing today. Now, look, as a Seattle Mariner fan, again, I will point out that Flexen was terrible in Seattle this year. He's actually pitched decently over his last couple of starts. He's given up 3 runs over the last 11 innings. That's lowered his ERA to 6.94, which tells you just how bad he's been for the majority of the year. And look, one of those starts came against the White Sox, who just have an absolutely atrocious lineup. One of them against the Orioles, who do not. So credit to him there. But I will take my chances of Chris Flexen pitching against the Toronto lineup. I've got Danny Jansen, Brandon Belt, George Springer, and Dalton Varsho in the lineup. Varsho, I think, is a really interesting one because he's been playing better lately. Maybe a chance of providing that combo meal for you with that homer and that stolen base. George Springer had an excellent August, one of the few Blue Jays who did play really well. I think all 4 of those guys have a chance for good offensive success, especially when you consider the fact that they're going to play in that hitting utopia that is Colorado against a pitcher that just doesn't miss bats in Chris Flexen.
Right. Yeah. Chris Flexen, like a soft tossing, throws that cutter to try to induce soft
Yeah,
contact. It's a really bad recipe for Coors Field. And when
sure.
you're facing a lineup that has the, talent on paper that the Blue Jays have, you got to get some kind of action in that game. And we can talk about some contrarian plays out there too.
Right, absolutely. Drew, today's starting pitching slate is loaded with really good
Mm-hmm.
pitchers. We were talking before, just a couple that we won't mention that are pitching today. Freddie Peralta, Zach Wheeler, Justin Verlander is going to get a chance to pitch. But we have so many good guys today that we're not even going to suggest those players. But who are you going to suggest go today?
Yeah, I mean, you can get a lot of value for a really good starter in a really good spot. It's
Yeah,
really like a very attractive slate to be playing daily fantasy baseball, and to have the contrarian edge optimizer on your side is a great
yeah,
help. I'm looking first at Eduardo Rodriguez at the White Sox. Erod vetoed a trade to the Dodgers at the August 1st deadline. Wanted to stay put in Detroit to kind of play out the string there before he opts out of what's remaining on his contract with the Tigers and heads into free agency. He's building his own personal value right now. That's what
sure.
his primary motivation seems to be. And I don't necessarily blame him for it. You got to look out for you and your family above all else in this cruel world. And he's done a good job of building that free agent price tag for himself. So
Good
far, a
call.
3.21 ERA, 1.11 whip, 116 strikeouts through 117 and 2/3 innings this season. And talking about motivation, this White Sox team that he's facing doesn't seem to have much of it. Um, Shout out to that woman. We shouldn't talk about that story, but she
Nope,
had
you
a lot
sure
more
should.
motivation. She had a lot more motivation than the team on the field does.
Sure
Anyway,
did.
I think Eduardo Rodriguez cruises here on Friday night with solid run prevention, some strikeouts. He's capable of all of that. And I think he has a really good shot at getting a win pitching deep into games there as he builds his own free agent value and possibly helps the Tigers, notch a victory.
Absolutely. I love that call. I've been really happy for Rodriguez this year, who dealt with some stuff that was pretty awful in the previous season. And one of the reasons why he did decline that trade, to see him rebuild his value has been pretty awesome to see. And I think that call is great. That White Sox lineup is just dreadful. I think that's going to be a long rebuild in Chicago if they're not willing to put in resources immediately, because outside of Luis Robert and outside of Eloy Jimenez, when he can stay healthy, there's just not a whole heck of a lot to like in that lineup. Another team that there's not a whole heck of a lot to like in that lineup in terms of quality and quantity is the Cleveland Guardians. And that is why I'm going to go with Tyler Glasnow as my starting option. And it doesn't hurt the fact that Glasnow has been really good lately. He did have a clunker against the Angels where he gave up 5 runs, but outside of that, he has not allowed more than 3 runs since July 1st. And that was when he was starting against the Seattle Mariners. I also believe there might have been a little bit of an injury in that game. But in the month of August, he has an 18-5 strikeout to walk ratio. Even with that 5-run game, he still has a 3.0 ERA, coming off a start against that not very good Yankee lineup where he threw 6 shutout innings, walked 2, and struck out 4. I think he's a good bet to miss a lot of bats against a Chicago. Look, Cleveland just claimed a bunch of guys. None of them are going to help him offensively. They are going to be guys that are helping that pitching staff, which is great. But it is not going to be a very good offense in Cleveland for a little while, I think. All due respect to Jose Ramirez and a couple of other guys. I will be streaming against the Guardians whenever there's a quality pitcher, and there is a quality pitcher today in Tyler Glasnow.
Yeah, we like the Rays pitching and hitting on this slate for sure. It's a really good matchup for them at
Yeah.
Cleveland in general. My other starter to target, I think, is Yuri Perez, who's facing the Nationals on the road at Washington. In season long fantasy leagues, the frustration with Perez has been, palpable because the Marlins have had to watch his workload, all year. He's been sent down, even though he was pitching like one of the best pitchers in baseball. But he's back up now. And in DFS, we get to analyze these pitchers and players on a day-to-day basis and not really think about the long term. And Perez should be full bore against Washington as the Marlins try to keep their NL wildcard hopes alive. What are they? They're 3 games back right now of the Giants for the 3rd NL wildcard spot. And the Giants, they paid off well for us as we were building our lineups on Thursday's show. But
Sure
I
did.
think that's a team that is gettable. It's a team that the Marlins could feel like they can chase down. So they're going to let Perez go in this one. They're going to try to sweep the Nationals. Perez has been superb this year when the Marlins have let him do his thing at 2.68 ERA, 1.04 whip, and 90 strikeouts through his first 74 major league innings. He just faced the Nationals last time through the Marlins rotation, racked up 7 strikeouts while allowing only 1 unearned run in 6 innings. And then the start before that at Dodger Stadium, the 20-year-old, he's 20, that's right, had 10
Yeah.
strikeouts and 6 scoreless innings against the mighty Dodgers on the
Yeah.
road. Only 2 hits allowed, no walks. I mean, he could dominate on Friday at Nationals Park. Washington has actually fared well against lefties this year. We talked about that on Thursday's show, but the struggles against righties are real, and
Sure.
most pitchers are right-handed. Really love Yuri Perez in this matchup at a decent price, too. I mean, we talked about how many good starters there are available. I wonder what Perez's ownership percentage will be like, because he
Yeah.
really sticks out to me as a guy that you want to have in your lineup.
Can't help but think, too, Drew, if Perez would have stayed up through the year, if this rookie of the year race might have gotten a little Carroll's with the way Perez is at least way in the one, and he really had 7 ready against.
I think Chris might have frozen. I could just close out the show while we wait for him to come back with some contrarian optimizer picks, which is, the way to do this, to find contrarian edge plays using these tools that we have here at Fantasy Sports Logic. Um, One way to do it is just have it generate some stacks like we were talking about earlier. What do we have? The Orioles, the Blue Jays, the Rays tonight. And look at who sticks out beyond those stacks. What are the value plays that are? Oh, we have them back, Chris. Let's tell the audience how to find contrarian optimizer plays on the board beyond the stacks that we usually build.
Sure, absolutely. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick, and also talk about my other starting pitcher while I do that, because
Yeah, do that.
I really like. I don't normally recommend picking somebody in Colorado, but I'm going to go with Hyunjin Ryu because I think he has an excellent chance to pick up a win today. Has allowed no more than 2 runs in his last 4 starts. Hasn't been getting extremely deep into games, which is a big, kind of a worry there, but I really like the chance for Toronto to jump out to an early lead, give him that win, give you a low ERA for the day, even if you're not going to get a ton of strikeouts. So yeah, I would absolutely consider Hyunjin Ryu, maybe pairing with one of those top starters because he's not going to be as expensive. But if you take a look at the
Or as
optimizer, and
owned,
yeah,
people aren't
yeah,
going to have Hyunjin Ryu at Coors Field. I
yeah,
like that as a contrarian play too. Like you
yeah,
generally want to avoid pitchers at Coors Field, but that Rockies lineup is so bad. We talked about Brendan Rodgers might not even be in there as he deals with an illness. Like
sure.
he can do fine to really well, at a low ownership percentage and at a low cost.
Absolutely. So if you take a look at this contrarian optimizer and if you go to generate your lineup, you'll see quite a few guys that are kind of interesting here. We've talked a lot about Ji-Hwan Bae as a contrarian play just because of the fact that he can provide those combo meals, those homers and the stolen base, particularly the stolen bases. He makes a lot of sense. Taking a look here, Luis Rengifo, who has been just absolutely excellent, especially actually since the Angels basically said we don't care about this season anymore.
Yeah.
Thairo Estrada, one of the more interesting plays. Anybody you're seeing here that you really like, and Drew?
I mean, Kevin Kiermaier, as you noted, Chris, as we've talked about, the Blue Jays are out in Coors
Yeah,
Field, and we want to have at least some piece of that lineup. If you're not going to stack the Blue Jays, if you're making multiple lineups, at least have a stack of them in one of them, or multiple of
sure.
them. But if you just want to get a cheap part of that offensive attack in the thin air of Denver, I think Kiermaier makes a lot of sense. Maybe getting 4 at bats toward the bottom of that lineup as the Blue Jays turn it over. Akil Baddoo sticks out here as
Hmm.
you're looking at these optimizer picks. The likely leadoff man for the Tigers at the White Sox. He never quite built on that mini breakout from the 2021 season, but a dynamic skill set at a good price in a favorable spot. Yeah, my best, you know, workflow toward finding these optimizer contrarian values is to have it generate lineups, have it generate a stack where there's 4 players from an offense that I really like, and then it's going to spit out some other players that are at a cheaper price at different positions. Or if you just need to fill like the catcher spot or fill an outfielder or fill a third baseman, you can sort and filter by that and look at owners projected ownership percentage, look at what the blend is saying from all these projection systems, into our own proprietary blend, and what it's projecting for a guy who's maybe at a low cost and maybe in a good situation at the top of a lineup or at the bottom of a lineup that's going to be really productive in general. There are just a lot of ways to look at it and to find these value plays. I like Jaiwan Bay. I mean, you mentioned him earlier, and he's kind of
Hmm.
been a popular, like, low cash option, I think, for a lot of DFS players. But yeah, could that lead off for the Pirates on Friday if Cabrian Hayes doesn't against Dakota Hudson and the Cardinals, another team in the Cardinals that have thrown in the towel on the season? Bay could get on base, offer some speed, 21 steals on the year. That's at his price point. He's a really smart pick on a slate like this. Darian Blanco of the Royals sticks out. He's at 2,400. I'm interested to see like what some of these September call-ups will do if they're going to fit right into the lineup
Great play.
immediately. The Mets are reportedly calling up Ronnie Mauricio.
Hmm.
I might want him in the lineup, to see
Sure.
what he can do. Like an incredible talent, Could be starting at like second base, shortstop, third base. He can play some left field too. So I think he'll be in there if they are indeed calling him up today. Brett Beatty has been horrible at the major league level, but the Mets
Yeah.
are calling him back up. He's been awesome at AAA, continues to rake. He could see action at third base down the stretch, especially against right-handed pitching.
Yeah, I like all of those calls. It's interesting here too. Speaking of going to the pitching side, JP Sears is in a lot of these things. And look, JP Sears has not been terribly effective as a starter, but there've been a few flashes. And that Los Angeles lineup now is just not very good. And I could see that. Like, that's I think a really nice contrarian play, because there are not going to be a lot of people using JP Sears tonight, folks. I mean, I know we get hundreds of millions of people watching this show, so we're going to see some people automatically put him in the lineup because of that. But there are some people out there that aren't watching this show for some reason that are not going to put JP Sears in the lineup. Talk about a salary steal at 6,500. If he pitches well and you can load your lineup up with some other guys, like I love some of these options that are coming out of here with JP Sears in the lineup, I think that makes an awful lot of sense.
Well, the optimizer liked the Giants on Thursday's slate. It likes the Giants again against the Padres, who, I don't know if you saw this, but they didn't put in a single waiver claim on any of those players. Not that, they would have gotten a few of them. Maybe that's why they didn't. They've thrown in the towel. They know it's over. What a disappointing season it's been, but that's something to monitor for like momentum or just narrative purposes. That Padres team is really beatable right now. You could see Juan Soto and Fernando Tatis Jr. getting a lot of rest down the stretch. And you could see like their starters getting extra rest. I would think about going back to the well with the Giants, even though we don't necessarily love that offense on paper.
No, it's not our favorite team. And I think we've been too harsh on it maybe all year, Drew, but at the same time, we can only talk about what we see. I think that's going to do it for us today, Drew. Is there anything else you had a real hot take about before the weekend starts? Notre Dame by about 65 this weekend. Sound about right?
Yeah, they might give Eddie George a touchdown or two there with, what is it, Tennessee State?
Tennessee State. Yeah. The first time, and everybody now in college football has played an FCS team. I'm disappointed that that's a true fact, but it is what it is. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Fantasy Fire and Ice podcast. We really appreciate it. Do check out that Contrarian Optimizer. You can get it for $1 for a 7-day trial. Drew and I have just had an absolute blast playing with this thing and learning so much from it. And we're real dum-dums. So if we're figuring stuff out, average to smart people, there's proof that we're not that smart, can definitely figure this thing out. Stay tuned for daily shows all season, Monday through Friday. Check out the NFL stuff. We just did a mock draft. It was really fun to watch. And I'll be contributing some NFL stuff during the season. I'm very excited for that as well. Stay tuned and have a great